we wanted to kick off the summit in terms of the panels with a discussion about female leadership and female representation in the financial services sector. And the reason is that it's kind of, in the development finance community, it's not really on top of the agenda. And we know it is in the commercial banking sector, particularly in Europe, as a result of the European Union basically mandating that public companies have to have 40% representation on their boards. And then, of course, you see it in the United States, you see it in Australia, but there's an awful lot of the world where it's not on the agenda. And yet, at the same time, including, by the way, the donors, and at the same time, when you look at financial services, you can say that there is actually a correlation between women in leadership and actually focusing on the female economy, right? So that's why we're having this discussion. So I'm very honoured to have Anne CAIRNS, who's our chair, as you know, and the chair of, as our MC noted, Crown Agents, TMF. She's on the board of Lightrock, which is an impact investor, and many other board positions. We also have NADIA SAEED, who is the CEO of Bank Etihad in Jordan, which is the bank of choice for women and the employer of choice for women in Jordan. And we have AISHAH AHMAD, who is the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria. So I'm going to kick off with a question about CEOs. So fewer than 5% of publicly traded banks have female CEOs. And of the 190 member countries of the IMF, 26 have women as finance ministers, and only 17 have women as central bank governors. So that's 11%. As former chair of the 30% Club, a campaign that is focused on getting 30% female representation on boards, should we be focusing on getting 30% female CEOs instead? And if so, how?
Is that for me, INEZ? It is. No, we shouldn't. We should be focusing on 50% female CEOs.
Yeah.
Just to say the 30% Club, the 30% number is a floor. It's sort of a entry level that you would want to attain so that any minority group ceased to be a minority, but it's not the end game. But we're so far from that, as you said. And I think so many things have to be done, not just in the finance sector, but in the business world as a whole. Because in the business world as a whole, we've got 92% of the world's big companies being led by guys, and only 8% by women. So the gap is absolutely huge. Mm-hmm. And we have to take, as I say, massive steps to change that. And it starts right at the beginning about developing the pipeline. But, also you heard from Martina about managing your career through different life cycles and allowing women to grow through these cycles and supporting them and bringing them back in. Sometimes when they've moved countries, had children, changed their career, done many things. But also it's about creating the opportunity for women to really rise up to the top. We are not in a level playing field. We're so far from a level playing field, so we're going to have to take actions that actually start to level that playing field. And that can include all sorts of things like quotas. I know the 30% Club are anti-quotas, but sometimes you actually have to make rules to cause the change to happen because it's just not happening generically.
Interesting. Okay, we'll get on to quotas because we know they're controversial in a minute. But first, let me move to Jordan. So Jordan is an interesting country from this perspective in the sense that culturally Jordanian women are well educated, but then they don't get the opportunity in the labour market. There's a lot of pressure, let's say, to stay at home and all of that. But NADIA has broken amazing ground in the country, and your representation is very, very good at all levels in the bank. And there's a lot of kind of relatively simple fixes that add up to this kind of representation. Do you think there's a connection necessarily, Nadia, between you being a female CEO and achieving greater representation of women in the organisation? If yes, why? And if no, why not?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think yes, for many reasons. First, I think that having role models is really important. It inspires people, it motivates them, it makes them feel that this is possible. It removes any glass ceilings that are in your head, and especially if they know about your journey and if they know that you came from where they are today. So I think it could really help, and it could really give a boost to women's ambitions and them believing in themselves and wanting to be in those positions. The second thing I would say that it definitely impacts culture, because by virtue of you being there, it just, as they say, it walks the talk. So basically, it affects the whole organization. And definitely, it also removes biases, because, you know, like if a woman is on top of the organization, then to a great extent, we can know that she will not accept bias, at least. So she will make sure that policies, practices, etc., are really empowering to women, or they're given equal chances, basically. The other thing I would say also is that it's very important to have a voice on the table when you're making decisions, and having the CEO at least ensures that. Because, you know, I would say that this is the kind of thing that's sort of self-fulfilling, because, you know, like the more women are on the table, the more women are in the decision making, things improve, and then the more women are then things improve. So definitely having a voice on the table is quite important. And I would say that a woman would be more accepting to many of the policies that can help other women. For example, a woman would understand why would you want flexible working hours. A woman would understand why would you want zero tolerance in the organization for actually harassment or for discrimination, etc. A woman would support something like a comeback program, because very possibly she herself had to go through those years of wanting to focus more on taking care of the family and building the family. So in my view, yes, it does help. And actually, I also see it more and more successful, not only for the woman on top. The more women I have in the senior roles in the teams, the more progress there is across the organization, across all these elements.
Excellent. Okay, thanks so much, Nadia. And I'm impressed by this idea of that you understand bias, because in some ways, I think we've all, and Anne is of a similar era as myself. Actually, we're all of the same era. Where the women that are 15 years older, some of them actually actively kept you down, right? So it's like it's an odd thing that now. Not odd, but it is notable. It's not every woman understands bias. Let's just, I think, need to be a bit clear about that. But you do, so thank you.
The results have been very good. So
they have been amazing, absolutely.
So it's encouraging me more and more.
And we regularly have Etihad as a resource in our DEI task force to share how they're doing this. So over to AISHAH. So we have a female head of the IMF, at the World Trade Organization, at the European Central Bank, and also at the US Treasury. So we have this impression, I think, that women, to some extent, are at the head of economic policy making. However, this success, as we've just heard, has only translated into 11% of governors and finance ministers. So, AISHAH, you are the former deputy governor, and indeed we've had a fair few deputy governors of central banks, particularly in Africa. What is it about the economic portfolio, do you think, that results in such a drop-off? And why is this a problem, and what can we do about it?
Okay, 3 compound questions. I'm very pleased to be here, and I want to just shout out to HSBC as well for putting this together. I think, first of all, we need to celebrate these women and the fact that they're there. I think at no time in our history, in our lifetimes, have women been at the helm of global economic financial policy making. What you said about role modeling is a big deal. The fact that they're visible women, the fact that we're trying to change biases, and I think it was one of the female politicians in America said something about, we didn't win, but we made the sight of a woman in power more familiar, and that's important. Sadly, you're correct. That predominance of women in visible, influential positions, leading policy globally is not reflected in the countries for various reasons. And, some of the reasons we've mentioned already, I think I'll stick to sort of the nuances between the private and public sector. I've worked in both. I think the historical male-entrenched nature of policy making is very hard for women to break in. There's the political navigation as well in that space. Work-life balance is also an issue because people think, okay, when you work for the public service, it means that, okay, life is easier for you, you guys close at 5, but if you want to be in a senior policy-making position, it's a lot of travel, it's a lot of work, and that can be a challenge. The fact that you don't have many women in these roles. As deputy governor, I was the only woman on the bench of governors, and you can't imagine the kind of scrutiny that you have, and I was only the second woman in 60-year history of the Central Bank of Nigeria. It's the largest economy in Africa. I was only the second woman. And later I'll talk about sort of how I navigated that and what I did, but that can be a big barrier to people aspiring to want to be in the position, So these are some of the challenges. Why is it an issue? It's an issue because we miss out on the opportunity for better policy making, better financial and economic policy, better monetary policy. We miss out on the gains of more profitability. I think someone mentioned the McKinsey report of 2018 that said diverse boards are 21% more profitable. There's not been a lot of work, and I'm very passionate about this area because there's a lot of work looking at women in private sector and what they bring to the table, and it's quantifying their impact. I don't see that in the policy space. But the IMF did staff research that showed that sort of diversity in financial institutions from perspective of leadership and also diversity in regulation can actually make for better regulation, better decision making, better financial stability. We need to do more of that to sort of put out the numbers around why we should have more women. I think for the top jobs, and you talked about deputy governors, why aren't women getting the top jobs? Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like, okay, we're growing in the deputy governor space, we're not getting the governor space. I saw some updated numbers that about 3 women in the emerging markets had become governors, but it's still low. I think the nuances I talked about, and I think also power can be hostile to women. It's like it's a different standard for you when you're a woman in such a visible position. What should we do about it? I think we need to celebrate women in economics and policy making. We need to give them a platform to showcase their capabilities and what they can do. We need more transparent hiring practices. I agree with you on quotas. If it's not happening organically, you need to push it along, and it's quotas you need to sort of use the challenges with that, and maybe we'll talk about that later. And I think we need networks. I firmly believe that we don't have enough networks in the policy space. Mm-hmm. This is a challenging role. In the private sector, you have women's networks, 30% Club. A lot of attention has gone there. So women can support each other in that space, and you can have excellent people support them. But the women that are serving in public policy really don't have those networks. They're usually informal, and it's time for us sort of to bring it together.
Awesome. It certainly is. I know running our network that it is interesting that on policy, it's not that easy to find, to go to a place and say, these are all the effective policies for women to be included in the economy in one spot. Why? Mm-hmm. It should be known so that other countries can adopt it, right?
I think some of the challenge is that you leave it to the woman, the only woman in the leadership bench, to drive this agenda. And so women have to choose between, do I want to be taken seriously, or will they say, okay, because she's a woman, okay, yeah, so the gender thing, and that can be a challenge?
I think that's a great point, because, one of the questions to Martina was, what are you doing to help women with your supply chain and so on? And she quite rightly said, I'm running my business. I'm sort of trying to survive here. And, I don't have the capacity to be thinking of that right now. And quite often, women who are climbing the ladder don't have the capacity to be thinking about that.
Yes.
And then if you're the one woman at the top, oh yeah, you just go and fix everything for all the women around here, yes. Right? And as I look at the audience, I'm looking at all of these women, powerful women, no doubt, but I'm going, well, where are the men that are helping us fix all of these things? Thank you for coming.
The one or two of you. Okay, now, Anne, you ran MasterCard International for a decade and achieved 6%, I think it was, annual growth, or 10%. It was a lot.
Oh, much bigger than that.
Much bigger. Anyway.
Yeah.
My question to you, because I know MasterCard, by way of an example, really had a comprehensive approach to looking at getting representation at the top. So to all of our panelists, but starting with Anne, what would you say when you look back are the top 2 levers you've used to get greater representation of women in senior levels of the organizations you have led or are leading?
So, I joined MasterCard in 2011. And I ran everything outside America, which is over 200 countries. So to say that I was on the road is an understatement. And I got on a plane and I flew around the world when I first joined to try and meet everyone. And what I found out was there were just a handful of women that were actually running countries for MasterCard, given how many countries it was in. And I thought that was quite a surprise to me, quite shocking. So I came back home, and for the first 2 years in the role, I kind of sent a message out, to the thousands of people that worked for me saying, I'd like a few more women country managers. When we're turning over country managers, think about the slate, think about bringing women into these roles. It's a great job to sort of start, big starter job that then takes you to regional manager, global manager, and presumably somebody who'll run the company. And nothing happened. So, I then realized, oh my God, I'm this great global leader who's completely ineffective. So I called my head of HR in, also a woman, and said, what am I going to do? Shall I start, intervening in every recruitment? I mean, there's a lot of countries in MasterCard. And she said, we sat down, we brainstormed, and she said, I tell you what, don't do that. She said, because that sounds really hands-on, and you're really, telling everybody what to do. It's a classic women's way of managing, headmistress kind of thing. And she said, why don't you just say, you can recruit who you like. The region heads obviously recruited the country. Recruit who you like, but once you've put that person in place, next time I see you, you can sit down over a cup of coffee and tell me why you chose John, Joe, Mohammed, whatever. Just explain to me why you put that person in the job. It changed quickly. I mean, it was amazing. I think in the first couple of years, we saw like a 10% swing. And it wasn't easy countries. We had women running Colombia, Venezuela. We had women running Nigeria. We had Ukraine. We had France. We had Spain. We had Hong Kong. We had New Zealand. We had the UK and Ireland. It just changed. And all you had to do was say, I'll just ask you what your decision-making process is. And then everybody knew that they were going to be questioned about it. And I think finding that trigger, that you give people autonomy, but you think about it, you make them think about the decisions. That's a fantastic way of changing in big companies.
Awesome. Okay, well done. Nadia, what would you say are the top 2 levers to getting women to the top, if you look back to your career?
Well, I would say that there are 2 things. Number 1 is your HR practices, all of them, across all levels, across all functions, and I mean like vertically, horizontally, and everything. And you need to think of recruitment. You need to think of equal chances for training. You need to think of equal chances for promotions. You need to also check the succession plans and all of that. Because, I mean, like, it's a journey. It never happens overnight. You have to build for it, because at the end, you also want professional women leading. It's not just putting women full stop. You have to be merit-based. So you have to make sure that you give an equal chance for the good ones to glow and to be ready for those jobs. It's not, you're not gonna just pull somebody and put them in that place. So it's quite a journey to be able to do that. And, you know, like what we do actually is that we empower people, but we do put checks and balances. So we do have reports, statistics, dashboards, monthly dashboards that tell you what's happening across the pipeline. And that itself makes the managers revisit what they're doing, and they rethink if they see their ratios, if something wrong is with those ratios, they understand that something must have gone wrong across the pipeline. They understand that maybe they didn't get enough people to begin with, or maybe they didn't give them equal chances, and so on. And also with that, with HR practices, you will make sure that there are no biases, that there is acceptance to work-life balance, and all of these basically areas. The other thing that I find very, very important is to really focus on deepening and broadening their knowledge. Before I talk about that, with the first one, I would also say that performance management is very important. Having clear objectives from the beginning and having clear management, clear measurements also is very important, because no manager will put themselves in a place where it's clear that that person really achieved the objectives and then be able to deny them what they are actually eligible for. The other thing I would say is deepening and broadening the knowledge, because seniority and leadership requires that. So basically, you need to make sure that also amongst what they're given, chances they're given, they do work on cross-functional teams. You do actually let them be in the ecosystem. They go to networking events. They are responsible, or they are part of the partnerships that the bank has. You actually allow them to represent the bank, or in my case, the bank, of course, the organization. In other cases, you allow them to represent the organization in boards that the organization sits on, because it's that bigger thinking and that sort of better understanding of big picture is what creates seniority. And it widens your knowledge and broadens it for you to be able to make decisions. And as such, we make sure we have shadowing programs, we make sure that we have cross-functional teams, and we make sure we have rotations across the organization. And I always say also that by doing that, actually, you get the benefit of much more than that, because just the fact that you're making sure that your HR practices and culture is mindful to everyone, you get the best of everything, actually. You get the best of youth talent, you get the best of different educational backgrounds, you get the best of different ways of thinking, because you just sort of made it possible for everyone.
I'd love to pick up on a point that Nadia's just made about going on a board. And just before I left MasterCard, I sponsored a program called Women on Boards. Mm-hmm. And what we did was we brought in an organization that actually matched our senior women to not-for-profit boards. So they actually, you know, there's a whole cohort, about 30 in the States that started out, all went on boards. I mean, it could be the Red Cross or things like that. And then we started to roll it out in Latin America, and we rolled it out in Europe. And then we had this whole cadre of senior women who had board experience, and then they could go on for-profit boards. It was an absolutely fantastic thing to do, and the company had sort of a matching gifts program so that if you were going on a board and you had to contribute, it's the normal thing, especially in America or on a not-for-profit board, they had resources inside the company, not just the matching gifts, but also things like their knowledge of technology, their knowledge of, finance or whatever to bring to the table. So that's a great point about widening the perspective.
Yeah, definitely. We actually launched a similar one called Get On Board in Jordan. And later we managed to actually roll that out in the Association of Banks at large. And now we have a platform that have actually a big database of extremely qualified women who are actually now the most eligible for board positions, and we're trying to roll that to other industries as well.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Awesome. Okay, so Aisha, over to you.
Okay, I think my context was that, of course, only woman, and I was the first sort of DG, female DG in charge of financial stability, and that covered regulation and things like financial inclusion. I was also the youngest in a very long time. And so I had to sit down and think about what I could do, like how to use my voice. My appointment was pretty inspiration for a number of women. Coming into the central bank, it was very, very focused. There was no elevation of women. So two things I did. The first one was I used my seat at the table to drive an institutional sort of effort on women. So I leveraged Women's Day, and I created, a culture of celebrating it every year. But what I did further was that I enlisted the governors, so all my co-deputy governors and the governor of the bank, and I insisted that, Governor, you have to do a podcast or you have to do a speech every year. And it became a running joke. It's like, okay, Women's Day is coming, DGFSS is coming to meet me, because I felt it sent a strong signal coming from him that he, was committed to sort of diversity, and he celebrated women. And I tried to feature other women to come and speak. So the first speaker was the then Minister of Finance, who was a woman, and she came, she gave a speech. The women at the central bank were beyond excited to hear from another woman in policy. I had other deputy governors from other countries, former deputy governor of Central Bank of Egypt in my network. I brought her in as well. It made women feel more empowered, more confident. And, just simply doing that made them put their hands up. And we made it it was the whole organization. So the event would be attended by everyone, and it sent a message to the male managers that this is something that management is taking very seriously. It became less of an AISHAH thing as the only woman. It became a shared responsibility. The second thing I did was I advocated for women using my seat at the table. As the only woman on the Monetary Policy Committee, I will never lose a chance to, some of these biases are unconscious. Mm-hmm. People mean well, men mean well. They want more women to come up. But they sometimes don't know that, they're being biased. Even some women don't know. And when you're sitting there, you need to call it out. But you need to call it out in love and in friendship. And I never missed the opportunity. So two things. One, in terms of our policy on providing women opportunities to go on secondment, there was always this assumption that married women with kids don't want to go. They don't want to leave the country. And I'm like, we need to make sure that the slate is diverse and let them say they don't want to, but you must include them. And then the second thing was that there was an opportunity to make a woman the first director of security. And it was something that sort of the men in the room were like, security woman? I'm like, yeah, it's a job to do, right? And it's one of those jobs where if nothing goes wrong, no one really celebrates you. But if something goes wrong, everything sort of falls apart. But she did very, very well, So I think the point I'm trying to make is that within the limits that you have, there's a lot you can do, especially if you're being authentic. The reason why it was easy for me to put events together was because I had led one of the largest female-focused NGOs in Nigeria, WIMBIS, and we used to put together events. So I just brought that model, and I'm like, we're going to do this at Central Bank of Nigeria. And it became something people looked forward to having, and we're able to showcase our female directors because somebody will do the introduction, somebody will, moderate the panel. It just brought visibility and empowerment and just confidence, to the whole thing. Thanks.
Awesome. Awesome. Very, very inspirational. Okay, let's get to the issue of quotas. They were brought up earlier. So we have the EU mandate of 40% representation on boards and 33% of executive and non-executive roles by the middle of 2026. And then we move, for instance, to Pakistan, where the central bank, state bank there, has set a quota for 20% female representation across the workforce of the financial services providers it regulates. It has to be said that the person who put that in place indeed led women's markets, or the NISA program, was the chief sponsor of that at HBL before she moved to the state bank. So what is your perspective on quotas and on whom should impose them, if we should?
Well, I used to be really anti-quotas because I used to think when I was younger, we don't need quotas. There's plenty of talented women out there. We're all going to be successful and rise to the top. And now as I look back, I go, well, it just hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. And I think that quotas won't mean that that we have poor, one of the things is, we can't find enough talented women, and therefore the quota is going to mean that we've got a substandard person in that position. I just don't believe it. I mean, women are graduating from universities in practically every country in the world now at a faster rate than men. It's just a fact. And, we can't sit here as senior women and say, there aren't enough senior women out there. We know them. We have our networks and so on. So I think that sometimes you just need a little bit of a push. And that if you go into a job because of a quota at the beginning, you won't stay in that job unless you're good at it. So just accept that and move on and just show how good you are.
Excellent. Nadia?
Yeah, well, I think, yes, we need to have quotas. And I would say also that it depends on where you are in the world. It depends on the maturity. I mean, like, if you think of quotas, we're talking about quota in the job place, but there are countries where you still need women to have a better voice or a bigger voice in the political life, in the socioeconomic development of the country, and so on. So really, it becomes more critical and more important depending on the level of maturity. In a culture, in a country like us, Jordan, Middle East, etc., I would say it was very important. And if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have made improvements. And the thing is that everything can happen if you leave it organically, but it will just take ages. It will just take so long for it to happen. So some things need boosters. And here I go to my earlier point is when you actually boost or accelerate, it becomes self-fulfilling and it snowballs. So it gives you a much better result. I mean, look at us at the bank. Okay, I have been on the top of the bank for quite some time. We have been on it for the economic participation of women internally and the women market externally, and we've launched that in 2014, and we were Alliance members since then, and we've been really on it. And we have, now we have close to 50% at large, but we have 28% on the top leadership, and now we have 41 if you go -1. So it took us that long with determination to prepare the pipeline, because as I said earlier, it's not just get somebody and put them on the top. It's a journey. You need to invest in the people, and you need to stay meaningful, and you need to stay merit-based, basically. So I really think that it is something to consider, and it is something for us to make sure we actually open the doors, and we sort of give the young women the path forward, and then it's up to them to take it forward and achieve what they need to achieve.
And Aisha, what about quotas for the public sector?
I think in Nigeria, we've seen the power of quotas. Before I give the example, I like to say that two things about quotas. We need to realize that sometimes people think it's tokenism. And so it's important that it's merit-based. I think most times the women that emerge are actually high-quality women because there are not enough of them, and so it's really competitive. But I think quotas should be temporary things. It should not, and it shouldn't be just, it's not a single strategy. You need to fix the workplace practices, you need to fix the hiring practices, in terms of, having a transparent hiring process and all that. Now, where quotas have worked in Nigeria? Nigeria has, I think, across the world, the highest representation of female CEOs in the financial sector. 25% of women, of CEOs of banks in Nigeria are women, and these are big banks. Because if you break down the global data on female representation in financial institutions, you find that for smaller banks, you have women on the boards, you have women in sort of management and all of that. In 2014, the central bank came out with a regulation that said 40% of executive management must be women and 30% must be at board level. Of course, it didn't happen immediately, right? One of the first things that we saw was that we started to see more women be at the helm of the board. And then later it started to change and we started to see women at the executive level. And so that question you asked Anne before, that should we be sort of moving for 30% female CEOs? I think put women on the leadership bench, they will emerge as CEOs because, the performance will speak for them. I think with quotas, and this is what central bank did, you need to measure. So it's not just put out the quota, someone needs to monitor, someone needs to hold people accountable. And to your question, who's best to set it? I think it's governments, it's regulators, because they have the big stick that they can wield. But I think industries themselves can decide to come up with voluntary quotas. And in Nigeria, the industry has been very collaborative on payments innovation. Imagine if the industry by itself came out to say, we're going to put women forward. We want financial access for women. It can be very powerful. And I think you can also leverage the industry to drive advocacy. Because one of the challenges you have is limited funding to really push out the ideas. And today it's about marketing, it's about media, but they usually have deeper pockets. Mm-hmm. So imagine they take that on as, something that they want to do. It'd be really, really powerful. So I think quotas can work when you really, really need change. And remember what I said about the entrenched sort of male-dominated networks. It's going to be tough. It's going to take time. In the meantime, the companies lose, the world loses the value of the diversity that women bring. So I'm all for quotas.
Okay, we'd like to open up the questions to the audience, please. You waved your hand loudly there in the back or visibly there, and then there's the next lady is over there, and then right in the middle here. Thank you.
There's one to the right as well.
Okay, sorry.
I was told I need to shake.
You could introduce yourself.
Yes, so let me introduce myself. My name is Lina Higiro. I am the CEO of a commercial bank called NCBA in Rwanda. I'd like to introduce my Rwandan counterparts. Bosco, Access to Finance Rwanda, Raisa, Copedu, the biggest microfinance for women. So I'd like to thank you for this. The reason I was putting my hand up is primarily because I've been in the banking sector for 20 years now, and I just wanted to update on what's happening in Rwanda. Networks are important. I became a CEO because of two board members, female in other banks. So whoever started and pushed the representation in boards really makes an impact. And I really didn't believe in myself, and these women called me every day to make sure that I applied for the position. Secondly, with diversity in the Rwandan banking sector, it's 2025 statistics. Just for AISHAH, maybe you had 2024, we're 50% women CEOs for the financial sector. It's exciting, but we're not sure it's sustainable because our X scores are less than 15%. And out of almost 27,000 to 30,000 employed in the financial sector, 46% are women, and they're in the entry level, and they drop off at supervisory level. What are we doing about it? My co-founder, Raisa, is here. We launched the Women in Finance Rwanda about a year ago, and I want to acknowledge somebody from Nigeria, Miss Toyin. She launched the Women in Banking and Finance. She was actually a big guidance for us in COVID to help us start. And there's also Tracy Virgo, who's now the new CEO for FTSE Securities for Women. She's a patron, and she connected us to the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investments here in the UK, and we now have almost 50 students, staff, male and female, taking discounted courses to support capacity building in the sector. Why do I say this? Is because even when we started Women in Finance Rwanda, the green that this lady was talking about, Martina King, people kept saying, what's the value? And so I had to create value through capacity building to then bring in the discussion of, we really do have a challenge. And Access to Finance Rwanda, represented by Bosco here, will be doing the first ever disaggregated study on gender in the financial services in Rwanda, which will also be the first in Africa. So I just wanted to say things are happening, but it takes a lot of work. And those of you who are here and interested, I would really be glad to connect because there's lots of, you know, when you're 50%, people say, you're so many women. Why are you, what's your problem? But what's your problem? And there's also issues as leading. I'll say recently I had a real big challenge that happened in the business, and I was telling a colleague who runs one of the businesses in Tanzania, I said, but some of our leaders talk in parables. Why can't I be told what not to do? Why can't someone just tell me? And then he says, you need to play golf. He literally told me, you need to play golf because I get to know exactly what to do by the 9th hole. And I really felt, I mean, there's no support when you're in the boardroom. There's no mentoring. Nobody's telling you, what are you doing wrong? What did you just push that shouldn't happen? Nobody's telling you that. So networks are important, and I hope we leave this room with that support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pass them. Yes, thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Veronique Fixen. I work for ABN AMRO Bank in the Netherlands. Thank you very much for your very, very inspiring and insightful words. And you talked about women helping women into senior positions. How about, do you have any examples, or how do you see men also being more vulnerable, taking up certain different positions, also creating way and also making it more inclusive, not only for women to enter, but also in society seeing sort of movements for men to also take up more care responsibilities or jobs in the care sector, and making also that way. How do you see that?
Excellent
Is it
question.
A clear
Yeah, look, I actually, I think it's very important to have balance. I chair a board that's 60% women, by the way, at Crown Agents Bank, and I need more men on my board. Oh. I'm not sort of pushing men away, you know, in favor of women. I'm just saying, let's have balance here. And as you point out, in the healthcare sector and so on, you probably have many more women than men, maybe even in the teaching sector and so on. And you want to create a level playing field in those sectors too.
Exactly.
And I think one of the things that actually helps with a level playing field is data and transparency. I'm going to go back to the finance space now and say, often in the finance world, you have no idea what anyone else is earning at your level. You don't know what they got, you know, as a bonus. You don't know, you know, you can't judge how you're doing You can a little bit if you have good practices where you're giving people the right feedback, but often people who are being maybe left behind, and they could be men and women, it's very hard to benchmark yourself because of lack of transparency in the space. When you get to the very top of a public company, the exco level that I was at MasterCard, it's published. How much you earn is actually published all over the world. People can go on the internet and read it. It's a very good thing. It's a very good thing at this level because suddenly you see yourself together with your peers and it levels up whether you're a man or a woman. You know, you can have that conversation about, you know, am I being valued as much as the next person in the company? And I think actually introducing that across all industries and having some fairness out there and letting people truly know where they are is the thing that will help everybody.
Can I contribute to that?
Yes.
Okay. I think one of the ways that you can sort of try and change the perception of caregiving as the preserve of women is actually a simple tool that a lot of companies are using now, and that's paternity leave. So I spoke to a female CEO that said, for her, she wants to see paternity leave become a staple in the financial industry. She offers paternity leave, of course, because it wouldn't serve the women in her bank, it will serve other women, but she's expecting that other CEOs, once they start to do that, it then creates this, movement within the financial industry that women working in financial services need support. So you're sending a strong message to the men that work for you that they need to support their wives. And that can be a very powerful way of fixing the pipeline issue, keeping women in the workplace, because the family can start thinking about the prospects of the true people in the relationship, to say, if your prospects are better for this family, then I will be more flexible as the man. You stay in the work. I'll take care of the kids and sort of run my business. So stuff like paternity leave can actually send a strong message and change the society's view of that.
Yeah, we have seen that in the Netherlands when paternity leave increased from 2 days. When I got my first child, my husband got 2 days off from work. I was 24 hours in labor, so you can count that off. And now for my third child, he had 9 weeks off, which you could take in part-time or in full-time all at once. And it makes such a difference, because with new generation fathers, I see that they're taking these days and they're like, why wouldn't I take those days? It's like, it's not even an option to think about that. And it really changes the start for having a equal partnership at home. I think it was said, the deal you have at home, like was said before, it changes because, well, I don't want to take up too much time, but yeah, thank you very much. I've seen that in the Netherlands, really being one of those domino stones that has an effect on different things as well.
Okay, thank you. We're at time. Do we have 5 more minutes? There's a few more questions. 1 more minute? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, really quick. Just why don't we take the 2 questions at once and then we'll answer the 2 questions.
I was
First
really
question.
excited to have that box, but this is fine.
You have to catch
This is
it.
Mariam. I work for Bragg Bank. It's in the South Asian country like Bangladesh we are working in, and we're mostly focused in SME. So I just want to share one thing. The men, those who are patting their shoulders to being very intelligent and eligible to get in higher up in the hierarchy of the organization, they got their intelligence from the mothers. And every mother's giving birth to those men, they should be much smarter and coming forward to sit in a place like this. And I really feel very proud to share this kind of women-led, women majority panels and organizations and associations. And it's not always true that every woman wants to come to the top, or elevate their career into the upper level, because that comes with lots of responsibilities and everything. And in our country, what we see, women sometimes are not being very positive to take greater roles, better positions, because that comes with so many responsibilities, and balancing their families, their work, their children, and taking that much responsibilities. And they lack sometimes confidence on themselves as well. Like, whether I can take that responsibility, will I do good? Or they question themselves a lot. So I really want to hear from you all that how we can actually encourage the women to come forward for themselves. Because the pipeline that she was saying, the pipeline making is really important. Currently what we are doing, we are taking from another organization's ready mid-level or top-level management employees to our organizations and filling it up to making our own organizations percentage bigger. You know, that's called cannibalism. But we don't want that. We want women from the down line to coming up gradually and come to the forward and to the top. So they lack confidence.
Thank you. That's a great question. So that's about the pipeline, building the confidence. And just to get our last, not the last questioner, but the Yep.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experiences in this topic. I have got two questions, INEZ, apologies.
No problem.
The first one is a policy-related question. So this goes to probably AISHAH for the most part. It is easy to do policy influence at a regulatory level, for example, for the financial sector. But what I've seen in my work in sub-Saharan Africa is there are certain policies that at national level that actually discriminate against women. In one or two countries particularly, I won't name, the leave policy, maternity leave policy, discriminates against women immensely because it allows some of the banks to have practices where if a woman goes to leave a certain amount of time, that amount of time gets kind of pro rata basis deducted from her pension, which is grossly unfair. The second one is the issue of equal pay and equal work and performance management when women go on leave in these particular countries, means that I, as Janet, I go on leave and I have the level of performance similar to Joe on the other side who's a male. But when I get performance rated, some of that impacts me because I didn't spend 12 months at work to get the same bonus, same increase, and so on. So my question is, other than regulating and influencing policy at financial sector level, for example, how do you elevate that? What can be done to influence those policies at national level that impact women? That's my first question. The second one goes to INEZ. And the boy child has come up in much of my work with financial institutions. What are we going to do to make the men feel like this is not a women's revolution, putting them in a corner?
Okay. We're going to have answer one. You can pick and you can just spend 30 seconds answering any of those questions because we are really at time. Pipeline?
Yeah, I think, yeah, maybe I'll take that on. It's really simply a level playing field, equal opportunity, nothing else. And the rest comes alone. So basically, you need to make sure that there is no bias, there is no discrimination at every stage, as I said. So, and if the women know that this environment is one where they're going to be given an equal chance, that's it. So everyone will, and then the journey goes on. So
thank you. And on the policy piece for Africa?
Okay, so just one word, because she asked about confidence. I think we just need to change the narratives and the things we tell ourselves. We need to have more confidence in ourselves. Women don't, even women at the top. We still don't want to use the institutional power. We'd rather lead from behind, and we just have to just keep trying. I think, just to your question, I agree with you that if you have leadership in financial policy making, it's easier for you because you do have the big stake, right, to wield with the banks and all of that. To change that at the national level, you need changes in legislation. And I think the biggest way is to get public awareness, public advocacy, and actually enlist the groups that are influential. So there was a gender bill once in Nigeria that we're all pushing for. We had to go to the legislature, we had to go to people in the Senate, and sort of get people to come around it. It will take time. It will depend on political will, political leadership, but totally agree with you. And this is where quotas come in. If we want to change things at a very sort of influential national level, if the leadership has the will to do it, it will happen. But yes, I agree that sort of those are challenges.
Okay, Anne, you have the last word. 30
My
seconds.
last word is thank God Melinda Gates has got 12.9 billion to spend on creating gender equality, and she gets what AISHAH said about having women at the table.
Yes.
All of these women on the stage have been at the table, and it's really important for all of you, and I know some of you are and quite a few of you are at the table really changing things in the future.
Thank you. Thanks very much.